We've been going through 1 Peter 3:15 in our call to worship every Sunday this month. And we're going to be doing it in November too. November. And when I was thinking through that passage and how to connect that with the Lord's Supper, I realized that there's a lot of people out there that, as we claim, don't have that. Because if you have those of us who have a hope that lies within us, inside of us, and we're kind of awaiting what we're hoping for, there's people out there who we claim don't have that. And they don't mind that. And I want to give a quote by one of those people. And he kind of mentions something about some of the stuff we do. He calls it magic. But there's a guy by the name of Bill Maher. Bill Maher is a talk show host. He's liberal in his leanings politically and in other ways too. And Bill Maher, he makes fun of Christians. He just pokes fun of us. And, he makes fun of religion in general, and he's a hardcore atheist. And here's what he said when he was talking about Tim Tebow. I don't know how long ago this was, but I do remember seeing it originally. He said this: you're allowed to have your opinion. You're allowed to have your opinion that a Palestinian 2,000 years ago walked on water and did magic tricks and was really still his own father and all that stuff. That's fine. You can have whatever opinion you want. And the fact that a billion other people believe it gives you a lot of strength and credence. But I also have the opinion that that's ridiculous, that it's anachronistic. This is the 21st century. And what he means by that, when he says that, is he says, in the 21st century, we don't believe that people walk on water, and we don't believe that people can do magic tricks. Now, elsewhere, he has talked about the Lord's Supper and has called it magic. And usually he references what the Roman Catholics say about the Lord's Supper. And you have a lot of Christians out there, us included, who disagree with other Christians about what happens at the Lord's Supper. What happens? Does Christ magically enter into bread? That's a great question, but I'm not going to answer that. I'm not going to talk about that today. Because so many people are emphasizing what happens within the bread itself. Okay? I want to emphasize whether or not Christ is present within our lives. Because if he's not present within our lives, if we don't have a hope within us that we claim as Christians based upon what Jesus did on the cross when he was crucified, then we're going to look at something like a ritual like the Lord's Supper or baptism or even what just happened when they entered into full membership of this specific body. They're going to look at that as ridiculous. Some of it as just pure magic, and we in the 21st century don't believe in magic tricks at all. But was Jesus pulling rabbits out of hats when he had the Lord's Supper go on? Well, the problem is when you start emphasizing the bread at the expense of the people who the bread represents, and at the expense of the Christ who the bread represents. So whatever view people have, and a lot of Christians have different views of what happens within the wafer or within the bread, or whatever form of bread you use in communion. If we emphasize the bread alone and what happens inside of it, we're not taking into account, we're ignoring what it represents at the very least. So what does it represent? What is the hope that lies within us? It says, God entered our world. There's a creator who created everything. That's what we believe. But we don't just believe in a creator who just created everything in a hands-off approach and said, okay, I'm just going to let things take their course of action naturally, and I'm not going to involve myself at all. It'd be like someone creating an ant farm and then just not doing anything with it. Not cleaning, someone having a fish tank and not doing anything with it. Not cleaning anything like that. God is not a hands-off God. He creates a world, but he also is hands-on with that world. He is so hands-on within that world that he enters into it. A few examples. You have God in the Old Testament entering into creation by entering into a manifestation of a burning bush. And he talks to a guy while he's somehow in a burning bush. That goes on, right? You have people walking around in the garden who are told not to eat a forbidden fruit, and they're talking and they're walking with God, and there's a famous hymn about that. And he walks with me and he talks with me. You have a God that enters into creation and enters into the world that he created by simply talking to people and manifesting himself in dreams, and he does this constantly. And he's not overbearing on people. That's a beautiful thing. So it's pretty consistent to think that he's going to enter into the world and do something to deal with the rebellion that we have in this world. Everyone has bought big into the forbidden fruit. We don't have, Adam and Eve, yeah, you have that story of don't eat of that tree. Well, we eat of forbidden trees all the time. And what is God's plan in dealing with that and the repercussions of that? It's sending himself into the world that he created and literally changing things up. Okay? So, the hope within us is that God enters into this world. Now, someone like Bill Maher will hear that and say, oh, there's no God in the first place. I don't believe in him, and it's funny because when I hear that man talk, I can tell he's not read his philosophy, his theology, his history, even his science. He doesn't know how to handle that stuff responsibly. He doesn't know how to use his brain responsibly, and all he does is not believe in God and then makes fun of stuff like this and calls it magic, as if it's like pulling rabbits out of hats. When we claim that it's the flesh and blood of Jesus Christ that we're saved by, the physical flesh and blood of Jesus Christ that saves us and redeems us, people like Bill Maher scoff at that because they look at it all like magic. And so they're going to look at a little ritual like this is magic. But it's not magic. Because it's the presence of God within our world. And I'm not just talking about the world in general. I'm talking about individually, every one of us, whether or not we have God in our lives. The presence of God in our lives. You see, there's been a lot of Christians that have argued over what they call the real presence of Jesus Christ in the Eucharist or the bread wafer or the bread, right? And we argue about that. We concentrate on the elements themselves. But what about whether or not Christ is present individually within our hearts? What about that? Because that's the key question. Because if we don't have the hope of God within our hearts, if we don't have Jesus having done something within us, then this is going to be meaningless. Let me give you kind of an analogy to help you out with what I'm talking about. About a month and a half ago, there was a wedding. My cousin had a wedding, Rob. He married his now bride, Valerie. And at that wedding, Rob and Valerie invited everyone they loved, they knew, friends, family, all that stuff, right? And so everyone, we didn't know each other, but Rob and Valerie knew everyone. And on that day, right, they got married, and each one of them, in a very real sense, died into their old way of life. What was their old way of life? It's all about me. Individualism. They're no longer single. They were identifying themselves now as people who had become one. And then what happened after that? We celebrated. We danced. We had fun. It was great. We had a meal. And that meal was a representation of the celebration that we had of the connection between Rob and Valerie. Well, the question is, are we connected to Jesus Christ? That's the question. If we're not connected to Jesus Christ in our heart, then this looks like bogus magic or something like that. Why even enter into this? What's the point of it? You see, Bill Maher doesn't have that connection in his heart to Jesus. He thinks it's bogus. He thinks it's stupid. He scoffs at it. It's a joke to him. But it's not a joke to me. Because just like I know Rob, and Rob knows me, my cousin that is, and other people might not know Rob, and so they're not going to go to the wedding and celebrate the wedding, and they themselves are not a part of it all. They don't care about that stuff. In the same way, there are people that have not connected, don't know Jesus, and so they look at this and they think it's a big joke. But it's not a joke to me, because I already know Jesus. Because regardless of whether or not Jesus Christ is present, fully, manifestly, if his physical blood and flesh are in the elements, the real question I want to pose today is this: whether or not we're connected to Jesus, whether or not his presence is within our hearts, this element. That's the real question. And if it's not, we don't have the hope that lies within us. And so we might as well not give an answer. Because there's no reason to give an answer and no hope. So, on that note, I wanted to kind of challenge everyone today. You know, it's so easy to go to church every week and make a tradition out of it. And a lot of people argue about whether or not we Christians have made too much tradition out of certain things. And there are Christians that do that. But at the same time, some traditions are really good. And Jesus Christ himself instituted this. Because guess what? At one point, if we had become Christians, we said, I do. I marry you, Jesus. I am in a relationship with you. I no longer am living that single life. And now we celebrate it. Represented in this feast because he's in our heart already. And if he's not in your heart already, then don't partake of it. But if you want to partake of it, if you want Jesus within you, go ahead. It's all about Jesus, though. It's all about your heart in Jesus. So I hope those thoughts are able to get us into the right frame of mind. The hope that lies within us is that Jesus, in the person of Jesus Christ, God entered into our world. Did he enter into yours? So Wayne and Pastor Don will come up as I pray over the bread and the cup. What's going to happen is we're going to have everyone come up today. This side will come up, and I will give the bread and the cup on this side. Wayne will be on this side, and Pastor Don, if you can't come up here, Pastor Don will come to you and give you the bread and the cup. So let's all pray. On the night of his betrayal, Jesus took the bread. And when he had given thanks, he broke it and he gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take, eat, this is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." And in like manner, after supper, he took the cup. And when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, Drink of this, all of you, for this is my blood of the New Testament, which is shed for you and for many, for the remission of sins. Do this as often as you drink of it